The two here at the Epicenter are Roger Spa. I'm going to be running most of the session today, and Chris Glunt, your super ART representative here from the Epicenter, is also here in the room with me. So basically the call today is specifically to go over the use of the ART data collection tool. This pertains mostly to PCCD grantees, although anyone who is interested in using the tool is able to do that, and we can provide some limited support around that also. But in general, you will find that the tool was specifically designed to aid PCCD reporting. You should be able to see the tool on the screen. In order to download the tool from the Epicenter website, you would simply go to the Epicenter website, which is simply Epicenter, and you can use .psu.edu or .org. When you're at the Epicenter website, ART is under our list of evidence-based programs, so if you simply point at that and click Aggression Replacement Training, it will take you to the landing page for all of our resources that we've created around aggression replacement training. And down here near the bottom, this is the link to download the PCCD quarterly reporting tool. So you'd simply click that link. It may open immediately in Excel or may just download the file, but you'll want to save it to some accessible drive on your computer or network, and then reopen it from there for your data collection. Now what I have done is taken the tool and put in some sample data just for reference purposes. But in general, for folks who are absolutely new to the spreadsheet tool, in general, where you see yellow open cell areas is places where you will enter data. If the cells are white or gray, which we'll discover in some places through here, those are auto-calculated for you based on other data that you put in. I would also ask that as we're going along, I'm going to try and quickly go through all of the tabs and describe the spreadsheet fully. We'll start with the instructions tab and go all the way through to the 12-month follow-up questionnaire tab at the end. Once I get through the spreadsheet, then I'll open it up for some generalized questions or further clarification. But I should touch on just about all of your questions by the time we get to the end of describing the spreadsheet. So the instructions tab, for those who are not real familiar with Excel, the tabs along the bottom that you see at the very bottom of the screen in Excel are the way you navigate around an Excel spreadsheet, and these are simply referred to as tabs or sheets. So I'm just clicking on those and jumping through them. The first is a generalized instructions tab. We ask for a few pieces of information about the agency and the person who's completing the tool here at the beginning. Also very important is the grant start date. You'll want to enter the exact date of your grant start. As we go along, you'll see that a lot of pre-calculated items are triggered by that beginning date for your grant. The other information is pretty self-explanatory. It's the agency name. This contact and email would be if an Epicenter staff person or a PCCD staff had any questions about the data in this spreadsheet, that's who they would contact, who would be most familiar with your spreadsheet within the agency. Same with the phone number. This grant should also be the grant number, your 5-digit grant number for PCCD, and then finally the county of origin. This is mostly for reference purposes. This is also a drop-down list, so you can also pick from that list. So this is basic demographic information about the grant here on the Instructions tab. You can also print out this tab. It explains all of what types of data go in each of the tabs. And then finally, clear down at the bottom, you'll notice there's what we call the big green button. This button is connected to a macro within the spreadsheet. When macros are enabled, and these work most of the time, sometimes they're blocked by virus software in certain agencies or in certain computer environments. But what this does is it saves the current spreadsheet as it is completed at that moment, and then it resaves it again, deleting any potential places where there may be youth names. You can also do this manually. You could delete youth names to make sure that you're not reporting any youth names to either the Epicenter or PCCD or anyone else, but it allows you to keep those youth names in your working document. So when you click that button, it actually saves the copy that you're working on, and then it deletes the names and resaves it under a specified file name and tells you where it's saved that on your computer, so you would be able to upload and attach that in eGrants for those of you who will be reporting. So that's pretty much it for the Instructions tab. The next tab is the Process Performance Measures for Year 1. So right away you will see here that there is a section of yellow cells at the top, and then lower down you will see auto-calculated cells, and you will see there's some data already pre-populated. When you open this spreadsheet for the first time and it's blank, those will basically all be zeros at the bottom. There is just some sample data that's entered in here. This is a good demonstration of our first guideline is if you're reporting on a particular quarter. So you'll notice that this first column is year 1, quarter 1 of the grant. Based on that date we put in the Instructions tab, the spreadsheet knows that that means that it's July 2014 through September 2014. So it'll be the first year and first quarter of this grant based on the date placed in on the Instructions tab. These cells, if you have nothing to report, so for instance in this case in the first quarter the scenario was that there were 23 ART facilitators trained, and in the second quarter there were no additional facilitators trained. I won't get into a lot of the specifics about these individual items. If you have questions about those or what numbers to actually report, you should probably talk with Chris directly, and we may be able to answer some of those questions later after we get through a complete overview of the spreadsheet. So in this scenario we're saying that 2 quarters have been partially inputted here. And you'll also see that there's some other data in the spreadsheet that's being populated here with some numbers. The column E always has a running cumulative total of the numbers of the quarterly inputted data. So this tab, being a process measures tab, includes mostly counts of how many things have happened, how many youth have participated, how many youth completed the program, so how many pre and post surveys have been done in 3 of the pre-post test survey tools like the AQ, the HIT, and the skill streaming checklist. So this is the process performance measures for year 1. The next tab is the outcomes performance measures for year 1. Now the first thing you'll notice about this tab are there are absolutely no yellow cells. That's because all of this data is pre-populated and calculated for you based on data entered in other tabs. So you'll never have to enter anything here, but that does not mean not to visit this tab. This is where you would go to check and make sure that the other data you have entered is populating correctly, and just to confirm before your reporting cycles each quarter. This 4th tab is the process measures for year 2. Nothing has been completed here. Again, this is just sample data, this is just a scenario, but this would be where you would report your second year's worth of data. As follows, based on that date that we put in on the first tab in the instructions tab. We have year 2 and quarter 1 being July 2015 through September 2015 because we put an initial start date of July 1, 2014 in this spreadsheet. The 5th tab is the outcomes performance measures for year 2. Again, this is all auto-populated and none of it you'll have to enter, but you should check on it as you get into year 2 to make sure that things are calculating as they're expected. One thing that I neglected to mention is you will notice that that data that you put in about the email, the contact person, and the agency name, they're automatically carried through each of these tabs. Part of that is so if you go to print this out to share with somebody else, you're taking to a meeting, you want to describe something, it would have that header information carried throughout. So those are the summary tabs, and this is primarily what we check data on, and we roll up across the state by all of the providers that are funded by PCCD. We roll up this data and give them a cumulative report. So they not only get your individual information through e-grants, but they also see cumulative reports, typically once a quarter, and then also based on the fiscal years. Now we're really getting into the meat of the spreadsheet now when we come to the next tab, which is the Programs tab. This is primarily used to enter location of the program, your start and end date of each program. You'll track attendance in here. This is also where you would put in participant names. So if I add a person's name in here, just as I guess Joe, you would also track attendance in here. So you will notice that as you go down through here, there is room to put in a total of 20 ART 10-week sessions within this spreadsheet. For some of our larger providers, they actually use multiple spreadsheets and track things over groups of units, for instance. So if you feel that you're going to be running into more than 20 10-week sessions in a 2-year period, then you'll work directly with Chris and myself to figure out the best way to split those programs up and submit them on separate spreadsheets. You also want to be certain to make sure that you choose the gender of the participants in the program here on this tab, because one of the pre and post testing tools does have different norms whether or not it's a male or a female participant. So you'll want to make sure that you complete those here too based on the group. This location is simply for the provider's reference. You can put in, a program name. It helps you designate the person who's maybe the collector of this information, which program that it actually plays at. Start date is basically the date of the first session, and the completion date is the date of the final session of the 10-week program. We ask that you don't complete the completion date until the program has ended. Based on that date, that is what quarter that the program data will be populated into the summary tabs. So in this case, for instance, this is 9/22/2014. That's right at the end of the first quarter of this grant, and this is near the beginning. 11/17/2014 is near the beginning of the second quarter of this grant. So that's why on the outcomes tabs that you notice that data for these 2 different programs had populated to different quarterly summaries on the spreadsheet. The attendance is simply a drop down as yes or no as to whether youth attended that session. You'll see that it's broke out across the top here in the 10 skill streaming sessions, the 10 anger control sessions, and then finally the 10 moral reasoning sessions. So if they attend skill streaming session 1, you simply put in a yes. If they don't, you put in a no. You'll notice that if you do enter a no, the cell does change slightly in color to sort of an orange color. simply just to remind, it's just simply as a visual indicator that that session was missed. In practice, we do ask that grantees that are being funded by PCCD, if a youth misses a session, try and make up that session. If the session is made up in some way by meeting with the facilitator or another way, you can just change that to yes. So this is primarily about tracking dosage, trying to track if youth are attending each of the 30 potential sessions. Also, at the very edge of the attendance tab is a place to say whether or not the youth was administratively withdrawn. And that is simply an indicator as to whether or not, you'll notice that in this sort of sample data, there are quite a few no's where some of these youth have left the program. So this male number 7, for instance, has a bunch of no's. It looks like maybe he attended for the first 2 weeks and then dropped out of the program. If they drop out of the program for an administrative reason, so for instance they moved, they were no longer on probation and weren't required anymore to participate in the program, or for some other reason that was really out of the youth or the program's control, so they just didn't drop out because they didn't want to come anymore, you can indicate a yes here, and we do keep track of those administrative withdrawals to have some sense of non-completion of the program and why youth drop out. To the right of the attendance is an ongoing tracking of how many skill streaming, anger control, moral reasoning, and a total number of sessions. You will notice back on the process measure tab that youth who attend 28 or more sessions are counted as complete. That's basically just for tracking purposes. It's not a grade about the performance, but we are hoping that participants will participate in at least 28 of the 30 sessions. So we keep track of that, but it's just a good indicator of how many youth are getting full dosages in your program. And then at the column AQ on the spreadsheet, there is a drop down. What this does is allows the provider to choose what session was taught for each of the 10 skill streaming sessions. So that's what this skill streaming 1 through 10 is here. And so this provider, this scenario, they chose to do the listening skill streaming session. This also then populates these numbers. So you'll notice that this session 1, session 9, 16 correspond with what was chosen in this box. One of the things that we've provided in the tool, which I'll get to in a little more detail on the skill streaming tab when we get to that pre and post test tools tab, is that once you enter skill streaming pre-test information, on the far right of the attendance tab, it will give you some indicator of what your lowest scoring skills were for this particular group. So once I enter all the pre-test for skill streaming for this group 1, these 6, 10, maybe 12 youth, you will notice that the data is populated. So this is the mean skill score for each of those 50 potential skill streaming sessions. Because you cannot teach all 50 and you're only going to teach 10 of them, these are actually highlighted in orange are the lowest 10 mean scores of the skills. So in that group of pre-tests for that particular group of youth, the ones that are in orange are the ones they scored lowest. The ones that are highlighted in purple, these titles, are what were indicated by the art developer in the second round for a particular targeted population of males and particularly aggressive youth. So these are indicated in your ART training manual, these purple, these ones that are highlighted in purple, as some of the sessions that they recommend teaching in particular groups. These are not requirements, these are just guidelines to help the group among also potential staff meetings or discussion among the facilitators as to what 10 skill streaming sessions should be taught to that group. Okay, so that's pretty much it mostly as an overview. You can also, I didn't mention that these links at the top are just quick links to jump to a particular program. So once you have a good bit of data in here, this allows you to jump to program 9, for instance, and enter attendance information for that group. Okay, the next 3 tabs are all based around the required pre and post test assessment tools that we use for ART PCCD grantees. So you are simply entering the raw scores from your pre and post test. In this case, it's the aggression questionnaire. That's the next tab, the AQ pre-post tab. And you will simply enter the youth's raw scores directly from the survey as the youth responded. The first section here in sort of a pink or purplish color is the pretest. The next section is in sort of a pale green. That's the post-test. So that's the only place that you'll enter data, in these 2 yellow sections. All of the rest of these sections to the right are simply the summary scores. So here's the raw score for that pre-test and the t-score for that pre-test. And then in the green section, just like it's color-coded in the post-test, you'll see the summary scores for the post-test. And then finally, to the far right, these are the change scores. So any scores that are in green means it has been a positive change, or at least an expected change. In these cases, they're actually negative because we're hoping that those aggressive characteristics are going down in the aggression questionnaire for these youth after they've participated in ART. So when you do this post-test at the end of the 10-week sessions, you're hoping for lots more green than red, and if there is absolutely no change from pre to post, it basically is 0 and stays in a black color. What you may have noticed as I was scrolling across here is with the aggression questionnaire and the HIT tool, the How I Think questionnaire, there's also embedded ways to determine whether the surveys are potentially suspect, like the youth may not have been taking the test seriously. There could be potentially education problems. The youth may not be understanding the questionnaire, or sometimes it's related to environment. These are supposed to be taken individually with each youth. You can do them as groups, but we do find that folks have a little more trouble getting appropriate testing environment when they do things in groups. So if you see any of these scores highlighted in red, that means the embedded inconsistency score for the AQ is indicating that this test is being answered outside the norms for that test and could be suspect. So then what we do within the spreadsheet is at the very top here. So this invalid pre-survey rate is at 27%. So in this particular sample, you'll see that there are somewhere around 16 or 17 pre and post tests that have been taken by youth, and 27% of those are highlighted in red and being suspect. This is actually a little bit high of an inconsistent survey rate. We usually see these at 25% or less, but in general it's a guideline and it's really a tool for supervision. So we could assume, for instance, from the data that we're seeing here, is there were a lot of inconsistency scores in the pre-tests in this first group, but very few in the second group. So it may well be that the testers identified some trouble that was happening with their group the first time they tested, and they eliminated those, and they saw a lot more valid tests in the second round of programs. One more thing that I will mention before I leave the AQ pre and post test and move on to the next is that you will notice that these positive change scores do not necessarily meet a threshold. We do a particular calculation in the ART spreadsheet, which we call a relative change index. So not only does a youth need to change in the expected direction, so in this case have some negative or a decrease in these behaviors from pre to post, but we also do an actual norm of that group of youth in that particular cohort or that group of youth, and determine whether or not the threshold of change is more than what might statistically happen by chance in that group. So you may see that this particular youth changed positively in all directions, but the corresponding outcomes data in all of these cases might not be enough to pass that threshold, so they may not be counted in positive change on the summary tab, even though you will see that there is some positive change here. It gets easier as we move along because the HIT and the skill streaming tabs are pretty much laid out exactly the same. So we have a pink session, which is the raw scores for pre-tests, a green section for the post-test scores, and then finally the summary. Very similar to the AQ, you'll see an indicator of whether or not there were anomalous responses. This is sort of the background check for the HIT survey. They call them anomalous responses, and they can either be green, meaning the test was probably very valid, yellow, somewhat suspect, or potentially red if the youth is answering outside sort of accepted norms. So in this case, you'll see that there's a 0% invalid survey rate because they've all fallen within normal thresholds of either the green or the yellow category. But here with the post-tests, we have a 13% rate of potentially invalid surveys. And again, this is just for tracking, supervision, fidelity monitoring, implementation monitoring purposes, to help keep folks on track as to whether or not that's potentially improving or not when you're doing program supervisions. The HIT has the same summary sections. There's 50 questions on the HIT, and there's a lot more constructs in the HIT survey, but all of these are reflected and auto-calculated in pre-post and change. Last but not least, we have the skill streaming checklist tab. The only difference that you will notice here are there are no particular research norms for the skill streaming pre and post test. So there was really nothing to compare it to determine whether or not the survey may be being responded to in an inappropriate, unserious, or potentially, again, there could be literacy problems. I will tell you though, a quick visual check sometimes can give you an indicator. So for instance, a youth enters all 5s for the pre-test, they enter all 1s for the post-test. Just a quick visual check, you can sometimes get a sense of whether or not it was just simply someone not taking a survey seriously. So that's it for the three three pre-post test survey tools. They're all laid out the same with pink, green, and the blue change section. So with that being said, I'm going to move on to the observations tab. This is part of the fidelity, tracking the observer fidelity ratings. All PCCD grantees are asked to have a third-party observer during facilitation sessions, and you would just simply enter the date, the initial or name of the observer who was watching. In this case, so there are anger control, skill streaming, or moral reasoning sessions, so you'll just indicate what type of session. And then without going into much detail, there are specific scoring directions. Each of the three tools end up with a total of 13 points. So 13 is 100%, 5 in this case is a 38%. If it falls under an anticipated 75% threshold, you'll notice that it turns purple here. So again, this is just a tool for tracking those observations. General expectation is that maybe early on with new facilitators, they may be missing some of the key program components and may score lower. And then ultimately, as they become more seasoned facilitators, you would likely see these scores increase over time. So this is just a tracking tool to monitor and supervise and improve upon the process as you go along. The very last tab, you will notice that for the 2 sessions that were completed, so this is where I typed Joe's name in. You probably saw on all of these tabs that Joe Smith's name has been carried across all of these sessions. At the 1-year mark, beyond the end of the program, we ask that all grantees do a survey and ask the following questions. We want to know if the youth had any additional offenses, so we're really tracking recidivism rates, or if there was any type of placement. So a few of these questions you will know up front at the very beginning, and you can enter them ahead of time, but you'll see that whatever date the program ended will be pre-populated for you. This is just simply 1 year out, a target date of about when you would want to complete the survey, and then finally the actual date that the survey was completed with the youth. So again, this question, has the youth participated in art more than once? This is typically for some of our larger providers who may have a youth in a residential program and might participate in art many times over a long 9, 12-month or more stay. Or it could be a youth that's now in a residential program or an alternative education program who has participated in art in the past, potentially because they were mandated to participate by probation or in some other program that they participated in. So you simply can answer yes if you know that they've been in art in the past, no if you know they have not, or unknown if you're not positive or don't have that information. The next is, were they mandated to participate in art? This is not strict, and we don't have a very heavy criteria on this, but we basically, if a youth is on probation and it's a requirement of their probation, it's pretty clear that they're mandated to participate in art. In a school situation where a number of youth may have had some sort of a disciplinary referral into art, there might be some debate as to whether or not you would consider that mandated. But certainly if the principal or administrator has said, if you don't participate in art, you're likely to be suspended from school or you're going to be out of here, we would consider that mandated. But you're making a professional sort of decision in those cases. Again, all of this data is not for research, it's for tracking purposes, and we're just tracking the process and what are the potential outcomes of some of these youth. So if the youth has had prior justice involvement before they participated in art, you would answer yes to this question, and then do your best to pick, if you said yes, of these 4 things, which is the most accurate. At 1 year, you want to know whether the youth, there was any sort of recidivism. Was the youth had a new offense? You would say yes or no again here. And if there was any type of violation, you'd want to choose from this drop-down list. So if you've said yes, you'd want to pick one of these. So in this case, in this fake scenario, there was a second offense, but it was a simple probation violation. And then if the youth was involuntarily placed out of home within the last 10 months, again, we're tracking this for other purposes, because even though there may have not been an offense, they may have been mandated to a group home or some other type of program. So if you do say yes to this, we'd like you to choose from this list which is the most accurate type of out-of-home placement that they were involved in. At the far right in this Outcomes tab, you will notice that there's just a brief summary. It's just a count of all of the data entered on this tab, the total number of youth that fall in each of those categories. Okay, so that took about 35-40 minutes to run through a quick overview of the ART spreadsheet.